Okay, so when it happens from time to time that I find that there are people who, for some inexplicable reason, seem to think that it would be a good idea to live inside my head. And, you know, it's an odd thing because goodness knows I have a hard enough time living inside my own head. I can't imagine why ever anyone else would choose to live in my head. But it seems to be something that Shannon Carmichael does choose to do from time to time. And this week, Shannon has been obviously living in my head. I want to try to show you, given how screen sharing's been going and how everything else technical has been going this morning, it's probably not a good idea to risk this, but I want to show you a picture that I had intended over a week ago to use this morning on this service. So let's see if I can make it happen. What I can't do is make it big. Why can't I make it big? Oh, here. There. Now can you see that?
Try the green button, Christopher.
Hey?
To enlarge it.
I think it's as large as it'll go.
Try the green button on the upper left-hand corner.
Yeah. Is it not big in your screens now? It's big on my screen. Somebody tell me you can see that.
That's perfect.
Good. All right. Thank you. So this is a watercolor painting by William Blake. It was done around 1805. It hangs currently in the Tate Gallery. And the title of this painting is The River of Life. So before I knew that Shannon was going to be singing the song that she eventually sang for us this morning during our children's time, I had chosen to project for you today this painting by William Blake called The River of Life. And the reason I wanted to do that is because of the reading that Kathy just read. And particularly in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, Kathy read, Jesus' instructions to his disciples saying, as you go among all peoples of the world, live in such a way, this isn't how she read it, but this is my paraphrase. If you saw I did a video earlier this week on Matthew 28:19, in which I talked about my struggle with the issue of trying to make disciples. And so I had kind of re-paraphrased this verse 28:19, in which Jesus says to go and make disciples, to say, as you go among all peoples of the world, live in such a way that they discover within themselves the treasure that is Christ, whose life you embody, and then seek to be baptized and learn to live more fully in alignment with God's design. So the part of that verse that I didn't touch on at all in my video earlier this week was the part where Jesus says that as they go into the world and people's hearts are stirred by their words and their witness, that they are to baptize people. And baptism clearly has been a huge part of Christian tradition and a very vital central liturgical observance in our practice. And I've always felt a measure of regret and sadness at the way we in the Anglican Church practice baptism. I've had a couple of occasions to baptize people in bigger bodies of water than just the little bowl that we have at church on Sundays. But even the bodies of water, like when I baptized Grace, Paul and Tracy's daughter, even then we did it in a lake. And even a lake's not ideal. If you read the account of John the Baptist baptizing, he baptized in a river. And a river is the perfect emblem, the perfect symbol, the perfect embodiment of what baptism is intended to be like. And that's why I wanted you to look at this picture this morning from Blake. It's based on a verse from Revelation, from the book of Revelation, near the end of the Bible, chapter 22, verse 14, where John has this vision. He says, "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright and crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations." So this is Blake's version of that verse. This is a picture of the river of life, and flowing down the river of life is the figure that is probably Jesus holding the hands of two little children. There's music, there's an emblem of experience, the older people on the right, and innocence, purity and beauty on the left. And Jesus and these little children are flowing towards the light of the sun that is rising on the horizon. And that is what baptism is intended to communicate to us. It's intended to communicate to us that we are born into a flowing energy field, a flowing river of life. And the reason that's important this morning is because this morning is what we know as Trinity Sunday. Trinity Sunday is the kind of Sunday of the year that casts fear and dread into the heart of every preacher, because seriously, who wants to sit down and try to explain to anyone the mystery of this strange doctrine of God being three and yet at the same time being one? Who wants to try to make sense out of this Father, Son, and Holy Spirit image that we are given as part of our tradition? And one of the problems, I think, with trying to grasp or come to terms in any way with the doctrine of the Trinity is that we tend to see it in static kinds of terms. So we tend to see it as three separate individual persons, each with their role, each with their different functions. So you've got Father or Creator with the role of bringing creation into existence. You've got Jesus, Son, the Redeemer, with the function and the role of redeeming all of humanity. And you've got the Spirit, the energy, life force of God, who is bringing all of God's qualities and characteristics and presence into play in all of creation. But the real way that I think the Trinity becomes a kind of transforming vision for our lives is when we see that the real point of this strange doctrine is not so much in the three separate fixed entities as it is in the energy flow of love that is circulating among them, so that the Father pours out in giving through the Son, and the Son pours out in offering the Spirit to all people. And the vision is inviting us to enter into this flow of the river, to enter into the love, joy, and peace that exists in our hearts, and that is in fact the true dynamism of what it actually means authentically and genuinely to be human. We are most fully and most deeply human when we enter into this cycle of outpouring love, of receiving love, and of giving back and returning love in all of our relationships to one another, to creation, and to God. So in many ways, Trinity Sunday is it's an invitation to enter into a dance. I don't dance. I don't dance at all. I never dance. Occasionally, when I've done a wedding and we go to the reception, Heather makes me come up onto the dance floor and try to move my body in some kind of semblance of what might be thought of as a dance. But I resist it with every fiber of my being. But I recognize the importance of that image. I recognize how vital and central to Christian faith is that awareness that we are invited into a dance. And we may step on one another's feet. We may fall when we dance. We may feel foolish when we dance. We can't all look so cool as Shannon up there in front of the camera touching her soul and doing the actions. Some of us just freeze when we see that kind of thing and are invited to try to participate. I'm guilty party. But it's an important picture for us to hold in our lives. We're invited not to be, I've been thinking about, in reference to John's Gospel, which some of you know I've been writing about a bit, thinking about the relationship Jesus had to the law and what that looked like in his life. And we have the same problem with the law that we have with the Trinity when we see the law as something static, something written down, some code of behavior that we are intended then to try to follow. Jesus viewed the law as an intimate dance. When compassion called Jesus to heal on the Sabbath, the law moved to one side and the compassion moved to the center. But Jesus didn't dismiss the law. He didn't reject the law. He kept it as a guide. He kept it as a ground, as a base for human behavior. He kept it as a source of life-giving nourishment potentially for all people, but never if it's viewed as something static and fixed in place, only as a dance partner that we are invited to join and find in the depths of our being. So it's the Trinity doctrine is fundamentally about relationship. We are invited into a dramatic relationship with the power of life. That life, capital L, life, lives in every one of us, lives in our hearts, lives in the depths of our being and our spirit. And the whole journey of life is to find our way more intimately and more deeply and more fully to live in relationship with that force of life that is the river of life that John, the writer of the book of Revelation, saw in a vision at the end of time, this angel showing him the river of the water of life as crystal flowing from the throne of God. And we have to find ways, I think, in our lives where we can stop and kind of experience that and enter into that. And that's what church is supposed to be for. When we gather physically in a space, we gather in order to open more deeply to an awareness of that river of life that carries us and guides us and leads us. It's a little harder to do with little fixed rectangles on the screen. We were talking about this earlier in the chat time at the very beginning about, I think it was Scott was talking about interacting with students on screen through Zoom, I presume through Zoom, whatever it's through, and how there's just something missing in that. There's a dimension missing. There's a kind of a dynamism missing on a screen that is present when we can see nuances in people's faces, when we can kind of adjust ourselves to where they are and what they're saying and how they're reacting. And that's missing to some degree on a computer screen. It's the best we have at the moment, and so we work with it. But it lacks a certain depth, it lacks a certain dimension. And sometimes I think we live in life as if we were living on a computer screen, as if we were living just with little rectangles across the top of the screen or down the side or filling the screen. And we lose that dynamic energy force of love and light and goodness that is the river of life and that is embodied for us in this doctrine of the Trinity that calls us to enter into the dance. So I invite you, as we start to share in prayer, to know that you are carried in the energy field of life, that force lives in you, that it is your true nature, that it's the embodiment of who you most truly are, and the only desire of our hearts, ultimately, is to live in tune with that reality. And so I'm going to ring my bell, and then when the bell goes quiet, Sharon is going to lead us in prayer.